Whispers Around the World, a Heal Our World book from SufferingWell. Chapter 13, Frank. Ken was walking back from the grocery store, a light rain falling as he pulled his coat tighter. He spotted a man huddled on a bench under a worn blanket, his belongings gathered in a small pile beside him. The man looked up as Ken passed, his face etched with weariness, and their eyes met for a brief moment. Ken stopped, feeling a tug on his heart. "Hey there," Ken said softly, approaching him. "I'm Ken. Would you like some company?" The man gave a small nod, shifting over slightly on the bench. "Name's Frank," he replied, his voice rough but friendly. "Haven't had anyone stop to talk in a while." Ken sat down beside him, ignoring the dampness of the bench. "You been out here long, Frank?" Frank shrugged, looking out at the rain. "Too long, I guess. Life went sideways, you know. Hard to climb back up once you've fallen this far." Ken nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I can't imagine what you're going through, but I do know a bit about falling and finding a way back up. There's a hope that doesn't come from anything in this world, a love that holds us no matter where we are." Frank's gaze shifted, a flicker of curiosity in his tired eyes. "What do you mean?" Ken smiled sympathetically. "I'm talking about Jesus. I've been through some hard times myself, and there were days when I felt like giving up. But then I learned that God doesn't turn away from us in our struggles. He meets us right where we are. Jesus is a friend who sticks closer than a brother, no matter what." Frank looked down, rubbing his hands together. "I don't know if I'm good enough for any of that. Don't reckon I've done much to deserve it." Ken shook his head. "None of us have, Frank. That's the beauty of it. Jesus didn't come for the perfect. He came for those of us who are broken, who are lost. He came because he loves us exactly as we are, and his love can help us find a way through, even when it seems impossible." Frank let out a long breath, his shoulders relaxing a little. "I could use some of that, I think. I don't remember the last time someone told me I was worth anything." Ken reached into his pocket, pulling out a small pocket Bible he always kept with him. "Here, Frank, I want you to have this. You don't have to read it all at once, but maybe start with the book of John. It talks a lot about how much Jesus loves us. You can see for yourself what he says." He stopped and opened the table of contents, showed him the book of John, then turned to it. "You don't have to read it in order." He wrote his phone number on the first page of John. Frank took the Bible, cradling it in his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Ken. Maybe I'll give it a try." Ken smiled, patting Frank's shoulder. "Anytime you need someone to talk to, I'll be around. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. Jesus is right here with you, even in the middle of all this." They sat together in the rain for a while, Ken offering silent prayers for Frank, knowing that he had planted a small seed of hope. He trusted that God would continue to water it, bringing healing and new beginnings to his new friend. Ken noticed the way Frank's eyes lingered on the grocery bag he held, and he felt a nudge in his heart. He was out of money until his check came in a couple of days, but maybe God was calling him to fast. "Are you hungry, Frank? I just came from the store and I've got a few things in here you might like." Frank's face lit up, though he tried to hide it. "I wouldn't want to take anything from you." Ken shook his head, reaching into the bag. "No worries at all. I got more than enough to share." He pulled out a couple of small sandwiches wrapped neatly in wax paper and a few protein bars. "Here," he said, handing them over. "These should keep you going for a bit." Frank accepted the food, a grateful smile breaking through his worn expression. "Thanks, Ken. I can't remember the last time someone just gave me something. Not without expecting anything back." Ken nodded, his own smile friendly. Sometimes a little kindness can make all the difference. And you know, Jesus often did his ministry over meals, sitting with people and sharing with them. This is a small thing, but it's my way of letting you know you're not forgotten. Frank looked down, unwrapping one of the sandwiches and taking a bite. He chewed slowly, savoring it, then glanced back at Ken. You're different, you know that? Most folks walk on by, but you sat down, talked with me, even gave me something to eat. I guess I'll have to read that book now, won't I? Ken chuckled softly. I'd like that, Frank. And remember, I'm not far. You're not alone in this. They shared a quiet moment together, both looking out into the rain as Ken silently prayed for God to continue working in Frank's heart. As he stood to leave, Frank gave him a small, grateful wave, clutching the Bible and food close, a little glimmer of hope in his eyes. Thanks, Ken. Really, I'll remember this. Ken nodded, tipping his cap. Take care, Frank. I'll see you around. He walked away, his heart lighter, knowing that sometimes the simplest gestures, a shared meal, an affable conversation, could make the love of Christ real to someone who needed it most. Another week had passed, and as the How group gathered once more on Zoom, Yuri felt a certain energy in the air. She could see it in their faces, a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. They'd been praying fervently, each for their chosen country, and tonight they were ready to share updates, not only about what they had learned, but about some surprising things they had seen in the news. Once everyone had joined, Yuri opened with a prayer, asking God to continue guiding their hearts and reminding them that he was at work, even when they couldn't see it. When the prayer ended, Patty leaned forward, a small smile playing on her lips. I wanted to share something, she began. I've been praying for Greece, and I know we've all been lifting up their economy in our prayers. Well, just yesterday, I read an article about a new program their government is launching. They're planning to support small businesses and help families in need. I couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, our prayers had something to do with it. The group nodded, murmuring their appreciation. Yuri smiled gratefully. That's wonderful, Patty. I believe that when we pray, God moves in ways we may never fully understand. It's beautiful to see that there are already signs of hope. Ken gave a nod, looking unusually serious. Funny you should mention that, Patty. I read something similar about Mongolia. They've been struggling with air pollution in the capital, Ulaanbaatar, for years. Well, just this week, they announced a project to replace old heating stoves with cleaner alternatives. It's small, but it's a step. It gives me hope. Ronald leaned forward, his voice quiet but filled with a sense of awe. And I read something about the Philippines, too. They've been getting a lot of international aid to help with rebuilding after the last typhoon. I don't know if it's because of our prayers, but I like to believe that we're a small part of what's happening there. Patricia clapped her hands together, her eyes bright. It feels like our prayers are rippling out, doesn't it? Even if we're just one group among many, I think God hears us. They all nodded, feeling the shared excitement. Paulette, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. You know, it reminds me of what St. Francis of Assisi said, that we must start by doing what is necessary, then what is possible, and suddenly we're doing the impossible. I think that's what we're seeing here, God taking our small acts of faith and multiplying them. The group sat in a comfortable silence, letting Paulette's words settle over them. There was a quiet joy in their hearts, a sense that they were part of something greater than themselves. They continued sharing updates about their chosen countries, each person bringing stories of resilience, hope, and small victories. Audrey, who had been eagerly following updates on Brazil, shared an article she'd read about conservation efforts in the Amazon. They've started new patrols to prevent illegal logging. It's just a start, but it shows that people are taking action. As they spoke, Yuri noticed that their enthusiasm was not only in the answered prayers, but in the changes happening within themselves. Each member seemed more engaged, more willing to step out of their comfort zones to make a difference in their own communities. Toward the end of the meeting, Ronald spoke up, his face thoughtful. I wanted to mention something about my son. I haven't heard from him directly, but I got a call from a mutual friend last week. Apparently my son has been asking about me, wondering how I've been. It's not much, but it's more than I expected. The group looked at him, their eyes full of encouragement and quiet joy. Paulette reached out, her voice motherly. That's a blessing, Ronald. Sometimes God gives us small signs to keep our hope alive. We'll keep praying for you and for your son. Who knows where it might lead? Ronald nodded, a hint of a smile on his face. Thank you. I'm learning to be patient, to trust that God has a plan. It's been hard, but I think I'm starting to see that maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. Ken leaned forward, a thoughtful expression on his face, as he began to share. I met someone recently. His name's Frank. He's been living on the streets for a while, and well, I felt a connection with him. He's been through a lot. The others listened intently, sensing the weight of Ken's words. He seemed really open, even took a Bible I gave him, Ken continued. I'd like to do more for him, though, maybe help him get back on his feet. Ronald cleared his throat, his face filled with empathy. You know, I've got that extra room, and to be honest, I could use some company. It's been hard since my son cut me off. I've been thinking maybe I could take Frank in, just until he finds his way. I know it won't replace what I've lost, but it might help both of us to heal. The group murmured their encouragement, each one touched by Ronald's offer. Donna nodded, smiling. Ronald, that's so generous of you. And who knows, maybe being there for someone like Frank could bring a new purpose, something to fill that emptiness. They closed the meeting with a prayer, lifting up their own lives along with the countries they had come to care so deeply about. Each of them felt the stirrings of hope, small but steady, like seeds taking root in fertile soil. As they logged off, Yuri felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that not all prayers would be answered in ways they could see or understand, but these small moments of encouragement were gifts, reminders that God was working in their lives. She closed her laptop, whispering a final prayer of thanks. The journey was far from over, but it was clear to her now that God was moving, answering their prayers in ways both seen and unseen. And as long as they kept praying, kept hoping, kept trusting, she knew that they were exactly where they needed to be. They planned together, and a few days later, Ken and Ronald made their way to the park bench where Frank often sat. When they approached, they saw him hunched over, reading the Bible Ken had given him, a look of concentration on his face. Frank, Ken called out, waving as they approached. Frank looked up, a smile breaking through his weariness. Ken, and you brought a friend. This is Ronald, Ken said, introducing them. We were talking, and Ronald has an extra room at his place. He'd like to offer you a place to stay for a while, if you're interested. Frank's eyes widened, clearly overwhelmed. Are you serious? I don't know what to say. Ken clapped him on the shoulder. You don't have to say anything. We're just glad to have you with us. They helped him gather his few belongings, and Ronald led the way to his home. Once there, they showed Frank to the bathroom and laid out some fresh clothes that Ken had brought over. Frank looked at them, visibly moved, before heading in to clean up. When he rejoined them, looking refreshed, the three men settled down around Ronald's kitchen table with mugs of hot tea. Frank placed the Bible on the table, his fingers tracing the cover. I've been reading, trying to make sense of it all. I've got questions, and I could use some guidance. Ronald leaned forward, his face kind. We'd be happy to help answer those questions, Frank. Ask us anything. They spent the next hour talking, the conversation flowing freely as Frank asked questions about God, Jesus, and the hope he had never known before. Ronald and Ken shared their own experiences listening as Frank shared pieces of his own story. As they talked, the comfort of friendship filled the room, bridging their different journeys and bringing a new sense of purpose to each of them. In that small act of kindness, they found the beginnings of healing and hope, all brought together by the simple message of love and grace that had first drawn Ken to sit down on a rainy day and share a moment of compassion with a stranger.